Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
There is one thing that you should know before we start tonight's broadcast. The Anon who posted this copy and pasted the story from the Magic Cafe forums that was posted in 2014. Also, the photo bucket links do not have the images at full size.
Hello all. Well, I've had a fair amount of real paranormal experiences in my lifetime, and I'd figure I'd post a few here. Everything from growing up in a haunted house to visiting the most haunted spot on earth, Poveglia. For my first story, I will share my experience on the island of Poveglia along with my own personal pictures. This place had a weird impact on me, and hence I adopted the name as my own online persona. Hopefully you all enjoy, and maybe it will even inspire someone to create an effect off my story. Poveglia is one of the most haunted places in the world, and for good reason. This small island in the lagoons of Venice once had its own government until it was destroyed by war. It's now part of the sightseeing tour, but you won't be setting foot on it. Visitors are not permitted. An aerial photograph of the accursed island. When the bubonic plague swept across Europe, the number of dead and dying in the streets became unbearable. In Venice, the solution came in the form of Poveglia. Bodies were hauled to the island and dumped into large body pits. Some were burned, but it became worse. The living victims were taken to the island and disposed into pits of rotting corpses, left to die or burned as they painfully died of the Black Plague. It is said that part of the island's core consists of a layer of human remains, and that often fishermen avoid the area because they may pull up body parts. The war and the plague would seem sufficient cause for ghosts to inhabit this horrible island. And they reportedly did, but a new population was soon to be added. A hospital was built on the island and still stands today, although it is no longer in use. The patients often reported seeing people in their rooms and hearing whispers. One particularly cruel doctor watched his patients succumb to the madness and took an interest in their delusion. He began to experiment with the human mind, physically with his studies of the brain itself, and mentally as he sent the patients to an observation building, where they would be subjected to further torture. The complex also contains a haunted oven room and a morgue. Eventually, the doctor began to see the spirits himself and jumped, or was thrown, from the bell tower to his death. Rumor has it he is now bricked up in that same tower. Some say you can still hear the bell ringing late at night. You would think skeptics and believers alike would learn their lesson about Poveglia. Whether or not it is a place of evil is unknown, but it certainly does have a history of tragedy. And yet, it is to be used again. If you search hard enough, you will find plans for an educational center to be constructed on the island for tourists. They want to bring families to the island built on restless corpses. It's a horror movie waiting to happen. My tale. I have always had an interest in the paranormal and unexplained phenomena. It goes back to my youth, where I had the disturbing experience of being haunted from approximately ages 5 to 16. But that is a different story. I first heard of this accursed island while I was watching television. The island immediately caught my attention as being an interesting story. After that, I didn't research or even think about it much. A few years later, I joined the U.S. Army, and my first duty station was to be in Vicenza, Italy. Of course, I was excited. Not many people that were my age get to travel to Italy, let alone live there for 3 years. After about a year of living in Italy, I remembered the show I had seen back in the States, and I happened to be living only 20 minutes away from Venice. I gathered a few brave souls from my unit and told them the tale of the island and a few more ghost stories that had happened to me in my lifetime. I sparked their interest in the mystique of ghostly phenomena and eventually managed to convince them to tag along with me on a weekend trip to Venice. There were 5 of us set to go. My girlfriend at the time, Anya, Roger Alvara, Rich Spoor, Clean, and myself. We came equipped with cameras, watches, cell phones, and money. Anya and myself boarded the train and were on our way to Venice. Alvara and the others would meet up with us in Venice at a later time. When we arrived, Anya gasped at the sheer beauty of the city on water. We walked out of the train station and wandered a few blocks over to a quaint little hotel. We purchased a room for the weekend and went upstairs to drop off our luggage. Picture The first building you see when you exit the train station in Venice. It was under construction at the time. We then set out to explore this marvelous city. We hopped on the nearest boat bus. The city streets are water, so the buses there had small piers all around the city like our bus stops and rode it to the end of the line. We got off the bus at the end of the line and walked towards the majestic San Marcos Square. There we gazed up at the beautiful building to see life-size marble statues of horses on an upper balcony. Above the balcony, the statues of countless saints peered over the crowds of people below. We entered the church and saw a breathtaking array of scenes and images from the Bible adorning the walls in gold. After walking out of the church, my cell phone began to ring. It was Alvaro. He and the others had arrived in Venice, so I told them what hotel we were staying at and agreed to meet them there. After another trip on the bus, Anya and I met up with our friends at the hotel. We stopped at a local trattoria and feasted on a few paninis. After dinner, we hit up a few local clubs and partied the night away. The next morning we all awoke, groggy from the night before, and headed out for a quick breakfast. We then spent the rest of the day sightseeing until late afternoon. While we were at dinner, I started discussing Poveglia, and everyone got hyped up about it, and they all wanted to travel out there right away. Being the investigative person I am, I decided to interview a few of the Venice locals and see what they could tell me about the island. I quickly found out that Italians and Americans approach the paranormal in very different manners. If an American neighborhood has a haunted house, every teenager and some adults will head out there at one point or another for a few cheap thrills. Not the Italians. If a place is haunted, they stay away. The Venice government even went so far as to make the island forbidden and no one is allowed out there. The Carabinieri, Italian police, even patrol the island during the day, but the second nightfall hits, they leave, and for good reason. Poveglia is no haunted house. It is a dark, evil place where hundreds of thousands of people were tortured, maimed, and killed in unimaginably horrible ways. After attempting to interview several locals, I found barely anyone who would talk about it, and most simply said stay away. I interviewed our hotel manager at the front desk. "Excuse me," I said to him. My friends all stood nearby. The manager quickly turned towards us and put on his typical salesman smile.
"How can I help you?"
He replied in a thick Italian accent. "I was wondering if you could tell us anything about the island of Poveglia." His expression immediately changed to a scared look. The hotel maintenance man who was working nearby abruptly looked up and walked away in an almost frightened manner.
"There is plenty of nicer things to see in Venice."
The manager said, trying to compose himself. He nervously pulled out a map of Venice and started pointing out majestic churches for us to visit. I interrupted him while he was telling me the history of one of the local churches. "We have seen all that already," I replied. "We want to go out to Poveglia now."
"There is nothing out there,"
he said in a very quick, nervous manner. His smile once again faded and an almost angry look appeared on his face. I know that I said, "But..."
"You should not ask about these things,"
he interrupted. He then stormed out of the room in a nervous and upset manner. I looked at my friends, and they all looked shocked as well. That reaction was weird. I thought to myself. We exited the hotel and approached several taxi boat drivers who refused to take us out there. After about an hour of people refusing to take us there, we had almost given up hope. But I wasn't about to give up. I approached the sleaziest taxi driver I could find and asked him to take us out there. Fortunately, this taxi driver was Russian and obviously had no knowledge of the local lore and superstitions. He agreed to take us out there and back for 100 euros. We excitedly reached into our pockets and chipped in for the cost. Spur ran over to a local store and picked up a bottle of wine for the trip out there. We then excitedly entered the cab, popped open the vino, and were off. After about a half an hour in the boat, the sky turned from a midnight blue to black. Nightfall had come. We were so excited about getting the cab driver to take us that we had not realized how late it was. Then, I stood up in the boat and pointed in the horizon. There it stood. In the distance, a dark island full of trees could be seen, poking up above the tree line. We could see the silhouette of the insane asylum's clock tower, where the mad doctor was pushed to his death by unseen hands. The island of Poveglia, as we approached it in the boat. By this time, it was almost completely dark outside. Below, another picture of the island, and the dreaded bell tower. The closer we got, the more our hearts started to pound. As we approached the dreaded island, all of us stood there in silence. The eerie silhouettes of the buildings stood before us in the distance. A chill crept down everyone's spine who stood there looking at this place. The silence was broken by my buddy's voice. "Dude, my cell phone just turned off." And he wasn't lying. As soon as we got closer to the island, all of our cell phones turned off. I am not talking about having no reception. I am honestly saying that everyone's phone was off and would not turn back on. It was like we passed through an invisible energy field because all the phones turned off at the exact same time. By this time, we were almost upon the island. As we pulled into a narrow inlet, we noticed a small set of stairs that we could use to dock it and walk up to the island. The boat driver pulled up slowly to the staircase and shut off the boat's motor. Now, I must say, I have had some very scary experiences in my life and I have been to some very bone-chilling, haunted places, but Poveglia Island definitely had an evil feel to it. Typically, when you go to a haunted house, cemetery, etc., you get that feeling that someone or something is watching you and it feels generally uncomfortable. Poveglia had more of a "we need to get the hell out of here right now" feel it. But since we were so determined to check this place out, we put all those feelings aside and jumped off the island to explore. By this time, our boat driver, who reminds you has no knowledge or experience with this place, was freaking out beyond control. He kept yelling
Hurry, we leave soon. Okay.
towards us, as if being on an incredibly haunted island in the middle of nowhere isn't enough. We had to now also worry about this guy taking off on us suddenly. Remember, none of our cell phones can even turn on at this point. So I suggested to the rest of our party that one or all of us stay close to the boat, in case this guy tries to leave us. The island was very black. The only light source was the full moon above us, and the occasional flash of one of us snapping pictures. 3 of us had cameras and we were snapping away. The island was eerily silent ... and no birds. No crickets, no animals, nothing. It was almost surreal. The boat driver had a floodlight on the front of his boat that he was frantically shining over all of the buildings. You could tell he was extremely scared. We walked up to the doorway of the main building and took a few pictures. The flash illuminated a huge room that had debris all over the floors. We wandered around the front of the buildings, snapping pictures like tourists, for about 10 minutes. Somebody suggested that we go inside the buildings, but the doors and windows had what looked like a lockdown mechanism on them, so we decided against it. We continued taking pictures of the buildings and the ominous bell tower. The most terrifying scream I have ever heard in my life pierced through the silence like a knife. All of us stopped dead in our tracks. It took us a second to comprehend what we had just heard. We all looked at each other, stunned, before we could even talk about what we had just heard. The entire island erupted in screams. Our boat driver was freaking out beyond control. We all frantically jumped on board the boat. The driver could not get the boat started right away, and we were all freaking out. Finally, the engine started and we quickly pulled away from the island. The screams were still continuing. It sounded like they were all around us. Then, as we were pulling away from the island, the bell started tolling in the distance. This freaked us out even more because the bell is no longer in the tower. It was removed after the island closed down. Once we got away from the island, mysteriously all of our cell phones turned back on. We excitedly talked among ourselves on the boat ride home about what we had experienced. The second we got back to our homes in Vicenza, we rushed to get our photographs developed and to tell everyone our story. We were taking pictures just to show off the island to our friends. But we caught something else in one of the photos. Once I examined the photos, I noticed that we had captured a ghost on camera. Not an orb or a reflecting piece of dust, but the actual silhouette of a man who was not standing there when we took that photo. I took the picture to 3 different professional photographers and they could not explain it. You can see through the guy. See if you can spot it in the second photo of this blog. Anyways, after we left the island, some of the people we went with were still having weird things happen to them while they were at home. Like something had followed us back. Some of them just felt uneasy all the time, and some were having insane nightmares, and others kept reporting hearing dripping noises in their houses. When they investigated, there were no drips or leaks anywhere. And this happened to more than one person in more than one house on the same night. Overall, I think Poveglia goes beyond the realms of haunted and there is true evil on that island. Too bad we were only there for about 20 minutes. I would definitely love to go back, but be a bit more prepared next time. We had no flashlights, equipment, etc., only cameras with us. It is one of my life goals to get back out there and investigate further. I have a lot more pictures, but I could not find them this evening. I blew up the image for you all. Use your judgment and let me know what you think. Ready for story 2? Here we go. This is my first experience with the paranormal. The haunted house I grew up in. Maybe mods can bump this post up under my original entry. Also, I would actually like to request help from the community on this story. If anyone is able to research the owner history and overall history of this house, I would very much love to hear whatever you can find out. Thanks. The Lady on the Wall. My old address and location of this haunting. The home has been demolished. This story is the first encounter I ever had with the paranormal and also played a big part in my interest in the paranormal. When I was very young, about 6 years old, my parents decided to move out of their apartment and to purchase a house. They purchased a house on 44th and Villard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It wasn't a good neighborhood, but it was good for my parents who had 2 young children and a third on the way. The house was a very small 3-bedroom stairless ranch. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this type of house, it is a single-storied house with no basement and no upstairs. It had a bathroom, 3 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a laundry room. The house was purchased from an old guy, whom we didn't know much about. Now, when you picture haunted houses, most people automatically picture a huge, mansion-type house with plenty of rooms, and dark hallways, etc. Get that picture out of your head for this story. Just picture a small, white house in the inner-city ghetto. The paranormal event started almost immediately after we were settled in the house. It all started with me and my nightmares. Night after night I would have reoccurring nightmares of being chased by a red-headed woman with pure white eyes. Night after night I would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming and running into my parents' bedroom. My parents really never gave these events much thought. They simply assumed that I was just a small child with an active imagination, being frightened by nightmares. Then, they started to pay attention. These nightmares suddenly turned into reality. I would have a nightmare and wake up to see the head of a lady with red hair on the wall chanting. I could never see her entire body, just a head sticking out of my wall. She came to be known in my house as the Lady on the Wall. She had glowing white eyes, and she would simply stare straight ahead and mumble terrifying gibberish. It would sound like umli-doo-da-ra or some weird gibberish in a deep voice. I would freak out and run into my parents' room and tell them what had happened. I always had the impression that she did mean to do me harm, and that is why I always freaked out. Then Christy, my younger sister, and Alicia, my older sister, started seeing things as well. One night, the entire household was awakened by the sound of my sisters screaming in terror. My parents and I rushed into their room to see what was going on. They tearfully explained that they had both seen people dancing in a circle on their ceiling. Another time, as a small child, I had a dream that I was being chased by the Lady on the Wall. All over the entire ground of my house were these symbols, and every time I would step on one, skeleton hands would reach out from under the couch and other furniture and attempt to grab my legs. Now that I am older, I recognize that the symbols were occult in nature. Pentagrams, stars, and other symbols that were definitely occult symbols. And I had never seen any of these before. I was only 5 or 7 years old. I don't remember my exact age when I had that dream. Another incident I remember very well was one night around Christmas time. My parents and my little sister Christy went Christmas shopping. They left my older sister and I at home. While they were gone, the subject of the Lady on the Wall came up. My sister dressed up as the little orphan Annie that previous Halloween, so she had a red wig left over from the costume. We somehow got the crazy idea to call the Lady on the Wall. My sister donned the red wig, and we both skipped around the house saying, "Lady on the Wall, if you are real, show yourself." We were both just little kids bouncing around having a good time, when suddenly things started happening. Every single window and door in our house started slamming open and closed, and the windows were bolted shut for the winter. My sister and I were terrified and were crying hysterically out of fear. We looked out of the kitchen window that was shaking to see if there was somebody outside trying to break in. There was nobody there. Our dog, a toy poodle, was barking frantically at the door and its hair stood straight up like a cat. The dog hid under the couch and refused to come out but continued barking. Finally, I put on a Christian record of kids' songs and it all quieted down again. My parents arrived home to find us crying and huddled in fear in the corner, with Christian music blaring in the background. My father walked over and turned off the radio and asked us what was going on. We tearfully explained to him and he became enraged. He yelled,
"Don't ever do that again. You were calling demons into this house."
Now the years kept passing and the phenomena kept taking place. Eventually, we all grew up, and the nightmares and hallucinations may be easily brushed aside when they are happening to a small child, but not to a 15-year-old boy. As these things continued, my parents really started getting concerned. There would be thunderous bumps in the night, a loud bellowing laugh that would awaken even my parents, and far too many other things that happened over the years. As strange as this story sounds, it gets stranger. My parents eventually became aware that something was not right in the house and put it up for sale. And get this, they had it listed for dirt cheap. I don't know if this was the average price of the properties at that time, but I recall my father lowering the price substantially just to get out of that house. Now around this time I was about 15 years old. Here is the weird part. One night I had a dream that I was standing in a wedding holding a beautiful blonde girl's hand. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see the lady on the wall. I remember jumping in my sleep and trying as hard as I could to open my eyes and wake up. She looked at me and said,
"Don't worry. I will never haunt you again. You are marrying my daughter."
With that I woke up. Now the weird thing is that we continued to live in the house for about a year, until we sold it. For that last year and to this day I have never had another dream about her, or any other paranormal experiences that had to do with the lady on the wall. I am now 35 years old, and I am happily married. My wife is Filipina, and is nowhere near a blonde. I still to this day have no clue what that dream was all about, but I wanted to investigate. I went back to the house, hoping to ask the new owners if they have had any experiences. But the house is boarded up and deserted. It is the only deserted house in a 5-block radius. The last time I was there. Coincidence? There was a sticker on the window that informed me that the house was now owned by the city. So I called the number and inquired. The housing authorities alerted me that the house has been deserted since 2003. And the people who had bought the house from us had left without selling the house. It just remained there until eventually the city seized it because no taxes were being paid on the property. The owners didn't seem to care too much. This has baffled us for a long time, and we still do not know the purpose of these hauntings. I contacted several supposed psychics and individuals who claimed to have abilities, and told them my tale. They had wild ideas like maybe your true soulmate has already died or maybe someone who died is in love with you. The answers they gave me did not satisfy my curiosity as to why these things happened. Was the spirit still haunting the place and made the family after us leave? Perhaps in the future, I will return to the home that I grew up in and seek the answers for myself. If anyone goes and visits this place, make sure to leave us a message and let us know what you experienced during the trip. Also, back in 2011, my sister went to the house and it was still deserted. She took a few pictures, but couldn't get inside.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.